Well, I think my lifelong love of books started, like most people, going to a library when I was about 6 or 7. And at that time, I think my mother probably took me down there, got me a card. But after that, I needed no direction. And then I took out maybe 10 books a week and just read. So there wasn't anything unusual about that. And then I went to a Catholic school. Now, it's not the Catholic school that did it, but we had some incredible teachers who I just recently found out entered the nunhood when they were in midlife, which is pretty unusual. They all had degrees from Eastern schools in literature and English, and now I understand it. They were very helpful in teaching us Shakespeare and all the classics and that. I think what happened, I certainly, like everyone else, watched TV a lot probably when I was younger, and then I just started reading, and reading replaced television exclusively almost. And then after I retired, I began working with Lansing City Pulse, and one of the things they asked me to do is, would I interview some authors? And since then, I've interviewed probably 400 authors. I find that aspect of it as interesting as reading the book, is to find out how they wrote the book, what goes into that making of the book, and who these people really are. One of the things I like to do is try to find something out that no one else has found out. And I've been pretty successful at that, and that's been a lot of fun. One of the things I didn't know I did until people have told me is I carry on a conversation with them rather than a strict question and answer. And I think that's been helpful. I'm friendly with them, and I'm very interested in what they do as a craft.
You started Mitten Lit as a way to engage a broader audience, and specifically authors in addition to book readers.
Exactly. And Mitten Lit speaks to the mitten of Michigan. And the reason I did that is when I was working for the Michigan Sesquicentennial, that became an interest of mine as Michigan authors. And that was back up 25 years ago, and I've never lost that. Well, one of the things I found out is people didn't really know much about Michigan authors, historically or contemporaneously. And that's what Mitten Lit hopes to do, is to let people know who's writing, who has written. And so I follow both historical and contemporary writers. I interview authors. I probably have interviewed 400 authors for Mitten Lit. And what I try to do again is try to find something unusual, but it's not obviously as in-depth as a newspaper article, but people can go there and it's archived, and they can pretty much find, we're getting to the point where you can pretty much find any author of any relevance that's written something either in Michigan, about Michigan, or they grew up in Michigan.
That's also led to opportunities to have some consulting jobs that working with authors to help them promote their books. What are the challenges? First of all, how satisfying is that to have a career in that area? And second of all, what does that say about the book publishing industry these days?
Okay, those are both very good questions. One, it's really satisfying because I didn't set out to do that. I set out to just have some fun, but that fun ended up landing me several contracts. I have 2 right now with authors. I have one with a private nonprofit that promotes books. So I get to work on what I love. Now, I wish someone would have told me that when I was a student at MSU, that you can actually work on what you love. And it's a lot easier now because I got noticed because of social media, new media, blogging, writing for a weekly newspaper. But what it tells us about the industry is the industry has gone to hell, basically. The first thing that really probably happened was Amazon came on board. When Amazon came on board, it created a whole new outlet for books. But books sold through there are deeply discounted new. So that was one that would really hurt the book industry. Right after that, the newspaper industry started to go in the dumpers. And one of the first writers or kind of sections to go was the book review. The publishing industry. That was it falling, I think. That was the industry. That was sort of punctuation mark on it. And when that happened, there was nobody left to review books. I'm probably one of the few people, I am the only person in Michigan I know that reviews a book a week. No one does that anymore. So what happened is the publishers, undergoing great pressure from every area, almost quit doing public relations and media relations for their authors. Basically, an author would get a book published, they get 2 weeks kind of consultation, and they're out on their own. and out on their own, man, where do I go? So at the same time, that was happening with newspapers, because that was the traditional place to go, along with, of course, the big ones went to the morning news programs and things like that. But that second tier of authors, they relied on newspaper, basically, coverage to get their book published, or get publicity for their book. And that ended really quickly, so authors had to scramble. They very quickly had to scramble to do their own websites, doing their own bookings, social media, all that. And it is continuing to change. And what's doing that now is, as probably many people know, is the introduction of the e-book. The e-book is probably going to drain off upwards of 25% out of the print book industry. What's going to happen to that whole industry, no one knows for sure. It's really complex right now, but some books now sell more. Now these are the books on the high end, like a James Patterson thriller. They sell more e-books than they sell print books. And that happened within maybe 12 months. That's how fast it's accelerating. Amazon #1 bestseller this year was the Kindle. They sold more Kindles than anything else. So it's not slowing down. It wasn't a fad. I continually run into people that I'm just shocked are reading on a Kindle. Look, and if you go on a plane, almost every seat's got some kind of e-reading device now, because they're taking 5-6 books. It's very simple, and I think that's gonna really happen to textbooks faster than people believe.
So what is the authors that you work with, what genres are selling well now? Is there a difference in the new electronic version? Who can get promoted? What do people care about nowadays? Are we still going to get the great American authors emerging in this new world?
There's some question. A lot of very serious authors believe that it's going to be difficult for the very serious authors to get published and then to sell books. So in fact, I'm going to ask that question tonight of a gentleman named Jeffrey Eugenides, who wrote Middlesex, and Richard Ford, who wrote Independence Day. They're both Pulitzer Prize winning authors. They're both coincidentally from Michigan. Both of them I know have serious concerns about what's the future of the literary world. I personally, I don't think it's going to be as bad as it looks. I think because writers are writers. It's an addiction. I think they're going to write, and they're going to continue to write good things no matter what happens. But definitely the industry is changing now. What might happen is that the author on that second tier might never make it to the first tier, because they can't stay, they have to have a job. A lot of people think authors are wealthy. Maybe 2% of authors are wealthy, the another 98%. Probably 90% have to have other jobs. There's no question. I mean, and you'll run across that in a lot of universities, where a very famous author is also teaching classes in freshman English. It's kind of frustrating for them, I think. I think those trends probably will continue. They may accelerate a little bit. I don't think there's going to be any fewer books, because people are self-publishing now, and there's a lot of good self-published books. If you've got a book that can be multi-platform, I think you'd be pretty crazy to put it out in print form. You'd want it on the web also, because that's the way people are going to look at it. You want it on a Kindle, where you could click to a website or something like that, or a video.
When you look at the statistics about books, maybe one of the bigger stories of the last 3 decades has been that in addition to fiction, nonfiction, and especially a sort of literary nonfiction, what Norman Mailer called the nonfiction novel, has really come on strong. And there are a lot of former journalists who are now looking at book publishing as a way to make a living, writing about the real world, but in an interesting and engaging and literary way.
That is really a trend that probably started 15, maybe somewhere out in that range ago. It's become very popular. Again, a lot of authors come out of the newspaper and broadcast arena. One of the reason for that is they write. They know how to write, and they know how to meet deadlines. Publishers love writers like that. They know how, they have a basic idea how to write, and they know when you say a deadline, it's kind of real. But yeah, you asked me about some of the trends. One of the funny trends in the last few years has been vampires. At one time, maybe 10 out of the top 20 books on the New York Times was a vampire-related book. That seems to be going down a little bit. I think those kind of trends come and go, but mysteries and romance continue to be the best-selling books for the last probably 50 years. That has not changed. My observation is on nonfiction, I think it's gotten better. I think nonfiction writers and part of it may be from the web. I mean, they're able to do research that they could never do before without going to a city or someplace like that. And then, of course, they try to verify that the web is accurate. But this whole idea about creative nonfiction it was very controversial when it started, because people thought, you're making that part of it up. Yes, you are making part of that up. You could never know what they said in 1870 in a closed room conversation. Never happened. So they are making that up, but they're very good at it. I think those books are the hardest books to write. I just wrote an article on John Volcker, who was a Supreme Court Justice of Michigan, who wrote Anatomy of the Murder, and he wrote it under Robert Traver. But he did a presentation in 1970 to the Historical Society about writing the nonfiction novel. And that's what he said, that was the hardest thing he ever did in his life. He says, because you got to get it right. And he was writing Laughing Whitefish, he was writing about American Indians in Michigan, he was writing about the legal system. Now that part he got. I mean, he was a lawyer his whole life. But when he started to get into those historical areas, he was writing about the 1880s. He had to do a lot of research.
If you self-publish, tell me a little bit about the actual mechanics. What do you make if you are getting a royalty from a publisher versus self-publishing yourself? You make more, but you may sell fewer books. What are your options?
Well, that's a tough question too, but a lot of authors, and you've seen a few substantive authors, but not many yet. But authors are self-publishing. They're making more. They'll make 30 grand from a book online that they may have made 3 grand from a publisher. Big differential. Now and part of the reason they're doing that is they have to do all the hustle themselves anyway, all the PR, all the events. They have to do everything. So the authors become the person that does the book from start to finish almost. It's gotten easier to publish online. There's programs, there's sites on the web that do books that look almost identical to a print version that's done by a real publisher. I think what maintains a lot of the print version is the author ego. We're still in that culture that I'm not really an author unless I have, and it's especially a hardcover book. A lot of authors are embarrassed that their books are coming out in paperback, even though in paperback they make more money. They sell easier. A book, in case people haven't looked, is $26, $7 now, and that's probably on the low end. You could easily pay $30 for a hardback or more. You're looking at $14 for a trade paperback, the larger ones, and a mass paperback's what, $7.99. So the ones they shoot for a lot now are that trade, which is $14.99, because there's price points. And I've known authors that have made a conscious decision working with the publisher to go to that paperback version because they know they're going to sell a lot more of them. People will go listen to them at events, but they're not going to walk out with a $27 book. There's a lot of small publishers. There's more small publishers than ever. So there's a lot of outlets for writers. I think one of the things that's been diminished that a lot of writers got their start in is literary magazines. There's a lot of online literary magazines, but there's not the Saturday Evening Post or all the men's magazines, frankly, or the pulp magazines that authors got their start in. Science fiction authors almost to the person got their start in a pulp magazine, and none of that exists anymore. So they may be selling online, to an online journal or something, but you really have to look for those. You have to be kind of aware they're out there. So it's harder. You don't go to a news store and see them. They're just not there.
One of the things that I think has happened that surprised me is the Kindle works very hard at recreating a book experience, very flat, dull look, just as if you were opening a book. An iPad, which is what you have, or a Nook. Nook went for color. iPads are much more glossy. The Kindle, though, is such a large share of the market. One of the things you can't do on a Kindle is watch an embedded video, and it seems to me that for some of the books online can kind of blur, and especially for nonfiction, if you wanted to show something in a small video, you could easily embed it nowadays in an electronic book, but you can't do that on Kindle.
Can't do that on Kindle, and I think the reason Kindle is selling is because of price point. Cheapest thing there is, I don't even know what it costs anymore, $99 to $139. But you're right, you can't do video, and you can't do some of the tricks. I mean, if you've seen there's children's books now where you can shake the screen on an Apple iPad and the monkey falls out. Or you can make electricity go and hit the ground. So there's some really exciting things. Now, I know this is heresy among children's book authors and illustrators, they just hate when I say this, but those books are exciting. I've watched kids read those, and they are amazingly engaged. I think that that's the future. And it's multicolored. They're brightly colored. You can do, and again, like you say, you can do embedded videos. That's important. I think when you're doing something, say for example, I have not seen a really good nonfiction yet, but I think we're this year. I'm going to go to the Book Expo America in 2 weeks, and I think we're going to see some where you're looking at a nonfiction, but you're also going to be able to see historical video. You're going to actually, I mean, if books about Teddy Roosevelt, you can hear him speak, see him speak. I mean, there's going to be some things that I think are, and I hate to use this phrase because we've had people use it too often, but I think it's going to blow people's minds what you can do. It's exciting beyond belief. You could write a book about Ken Kesey, which I just saw a book on Ken Kesey. I just read it. It's called Acid Christ. Ken Kesey was one of the merry pranksters, a pretty colorful man. There's lots of video about this. And to see the first person in conjunction with reading about it, especially in psychedelic version of it, would be an amazing book to have. And those are the kind of things I think are going to happen. An art book, oh my God, an art book, it would just be crazy.
What we see now is that the video's on the website promoting the book. So you might see the video about Ken Kesey on the book page to lure you there, and then you buy the book from there. But embedding it right in the book itself, I think we haven't completely rethought this whole new digital medium.
No, but 1 year to 2 years, it's going to happen. Now, clearly they're more expensive to do, but in some ways, but maybe not. I mean, there's some digital video. I mean, if you work it right and you think through what book you want to do, I think you could put together a pretty exciting book already. And there's publishing firms that are growing to do exactly that. It's good. Next year, I bet you'll see some by Christmas that'll be pretty incredible.
One of the things that we had the opportunity to do recently was listen to Bonnie Jo Campbell, a National Book Award winner. What are we seeing in terms of book awards lately? You're doing the notable book for Michigan, book awards through the Pulitzers, through the National Book Award. What kinds of things are they looking at? We see community reads happening now. These really help sell books at the same time, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. And for, one of the big trends that I forgot to mention was community reads. Not only community reads, but a woman named Oprah. She dramatically changed publishing. She gave it a poke that's continuing till today. And a couple times she's interrupted her book clubs, and it's been really sad for the book industry because they could count on 40,000 books, or 400,000, or 4 million books being sold. So I mean that, and community reads. For example, East Lansing, MSU has a community read each year. Those are selling 10,000 books of an author who maybe have written that book 5-6 years ago. The Michigan Humanities Council has picked a book that won the National Book Award in 2004. Arc of Justice is going to hit again. So authors if you can get into that network, you are doing very well. The authors that can get into the community read programs have a career because they are getting paid probably more from their speaking engagements than they made selling the book. Now Dave Edgar's was an example last year. His book probably didn't sell that many, but he's making a lot of money, and he turns it over to a foundation, which is very gracious of him. But speaking engagements are what not most, but a lot of authors are kind of shooting for, is to get paid anywhere from $500 to $50,000, depending on the quality of the book.
Any closing thoughts about where you think the whole industry is headed? And if you were a young author, what would you advise a young author to do nowadays if they're in college? Should they be writing that book while they're in school so they've got it ready by the time they graduate? Or
I think first, and it's hard for young people to write and go to school. That is not an easy chore. You have to be incredibly disciplined. They tend to write in bunches at different times. I would try to find people who are like you. You can do that online now. I think it would be interesting to see if you could engage a book club, or not a book club, a writer's group locally while you're still in school. Some colleges have them. I think another thing to do, and I always recommend this, the easiest way to learn about what writers are like is to go listen to them. And oddly enough, an awful lot of friendships have developed like that, where that author will help you and take you under your wing. Authors are the friendliest people I have ever met. They tend to be very accepting of younger authors, because they were always, at one point, they were a younger author, wanting to make it big. I'd go to Schuler's. We're lucky in Lansing area that we have 2 Schuler's that bring in an amazing array of authors. Without them, this would be somewhat of a wasteland. Anytime there's an author who's on campus for free, I'd go see them. Doesn't matter what their genre is. And just kind of get that whole mystique of the industry down. But again, you have to write. I'd start submitting, like Bonnie Jo said, to literary journals online. And you have to be ready to get 100 rejection or more slips. But the more and a lot of times you'll get a rejection slip that gives you the idea about how to rework your book so it's much better. I would do that. I think you can be a successful author in your mid-20s if you work at it while you're in college.
Where do you get your agent?
It's the same way you get it published, but to get a book published now without an agent is getting immensely hard. And the reason, that's another trend in the industry. The publishers laid off so many people that used to read manuscripts. So what they've done is they've passed that on to agents, and now agents read manuscripts for the publisher. They'll work with a writer and find an editor for them. You may rewrite your book 5 times or your short stories for an agent before an agent will even say, I'll take it to a publisher. That's not bad. Now, you have to have a lot of discipline to stick through that. But where do you get an agent? You do the same thing. You send out a letter and you query. There's books online and offline and hardcover about who agents are and where they are, what they represent. One of the best tips I've ever heard is find an agent that has just left a company where they have agents represent genres too. They tend to represent romance or mystery or whatever. So you have to try to match an agent with what you've just written. But 100 letters are not unusual.
Get used to rejection.
Absolutely.
Any closing thoughts?
I think one of my closing thoughts is, especially for young people who right now are stuck reading textbooks, and this might not be the politic thing to say, but they're not reading for pleasure, let's face it. Generally, that'll come after you graduate from college, and I think that's when you naturally develop what you want to read. And it changes over time. I used to read all mysteries when I was young. I read everything now, but I enjoy nonfiction as much now as I did mysteries, because life is a hell of a mystery.